minutes. Let's give a round of applause to Scott Wiener, our state senator. And Angelina, first question is, what kind of beer do you like? Are you a light beer drinker? Are you a dark beer drinker? An amber. Angelina, can we get an amber beer for the senator? Fabulous. Right over here, Scott. All right. Are you scared?
Well, we asked for the questions ahead of time and he would not give them. He's like, it'll just be a mellow conversation, which means who knows with Manny.
I have been thinking a lot about this because I've known you for a while now, almost a decade. And I feel like there is Scott Wiener, the person, and Scott Wiener, the entity, or the myth and the legend. And so what I would like to do tonight is try to demystify who you are and what you do and why you do it. And I wanna touch your heart in a way. I'm not gonna touch you, but I mean like metaphorically touch your heart.
You can touch me, it's okay, man.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Be careful what you wish for. So I first want to just check in with you, Scott, and just see how you're doing. How are you in this moment? How is your heart? How are you feeling? Where are you in the, thank you, Angelina. Where are you in the, are you in the post-Omicron glow? Are you still in shock? Where is she?
Well, I got Omicron out of the way, so I feel good about that. No, I feel I'm good. I'm good. I'm optimistic. I think that I'm not optimistic about what's happening in Europe right now. That's actually terrifying. But other than that horrendous, dangerous situation, I feel good about what's happening here. And I think it's been a hard 2 years on just so many levels. And I think even for people who had the privilege of working from home and who were able to keep themselves safe until they get vaccinated and who had all of these privileges, I think for a lot of people, at some point, like as you start to relax a bit, like stuff comes rushing in. You realize all of that anxiety and fear that maybe you had sort of cabined off. You relax a little bit because things are looking better, and then it just comes rushing in. And so, that's hard, I think, for a lot of people. But I think people are just really ready to just get back on the saddle, and so that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I went to a noise pop film last night. It was a documentary about the best electronic rock band in history, LCD Sound System. And in case you didn't know that, and I got a text message from my friend saying, oh my God, Russia invaded Ukraine. And my first thought, and this is so damn selfish, was we literally just got out of Omicron, and of course, like the night of, there's a World War III situation, God forbid, happening. So it does kind of feel like we can't catch a break.
Well, and that.
Would you comment on that?
No, yeah, and it's really, yes, it's true. We can't catch it. We catch some breaks, but no, I know. You and I, as fellow Jews, members of the tribe, we know what it's like when you have this kind of tumult, and that our people don't tend to do very well.
I break out in hives.
Yeah. Whenever there's nationalism going on, and having to blame this or that, Jews tend to be among the first to get caught up in that meat grinder. We've seen it. The despicable president of Belarus, who's I guess now Putin's little servant. He's already demonizing Jews, like really explicitly demonizing Jews. And my family, I know yours came from Afghanistan, but my great grandparents immigrated from Ukraine, from Belarus and Lithuania and Romania. So that whole area there that's being impacted or could be impacted now, that's where my family came from. And they came because people were like the government was like, and vigilantes were like burning down their villages, and the pogroms were happening, and so they were like, we're out of here, we can't do this anymore, and they came to the US. And so when I see that kind of tumult happening, and that particularly in that part of Europe, it's sort of terrifying.
So, and just for the audience perspective, we're going to speak for a little bit, but then I do want to reserve a good chunk of time to just be able to have you ask your questions of Scott. So if you have them, start thinking of them at some point soon. It does seem, I want to talk about politics for a second, Democratic politics. It all kind of seems pretty topsy-turvy right now. Like, we won the election in 2020, and then it's just like, boom, all these recalls and Biden and Afghanistan invasion. And I guess I was kind of hoping for a post-Trump Democratic, get our shit together, lead, and this kind of strength of the party. But it seems almost from the get-go, there's, once we won 2020, everyone was all doomsday about 2022. And there's been all this mishigas in California Democratic politics. And I guess I just want to ask you, like, what is happening with the party right now? What is your perspective on what's going on with Democrats and the Democratic Party nationally and also locally?
Well, I mean, I think let's talk about Joe Biden. And, I say this, I was a Kamala Harris supporter and then Elizabeth Warren supporter. And with that said, Joe Biden, in a way, even though, yes, he was succeeding this just thing that, and in a way, you can only go up from there. I mean, imagine if that guy were in office now, right? He probably would say, sure, go ahead, conquer Ukraine if you want. But he came in with no margin in either house, right? And this whole thing, everyone's mad at Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, so am I. But like, of course, there's always going to be a random Democrat here and there who aren't going with the program. So he had no margin. They still got a bunch of stuff done, major relief package, major infrastructure, but yeah, not everything that we wanted. And you have the Republican Party that has decided, like, they literally have this philosophy, and they had it with Obama, like, okay, our only goal when you Democrat are president is you're not allowed to do anything. We won't confirm anyone to the Supreme Court. We're just going to do everything we can to try to make sure you can do nothing. So yes, we should be mad at, Manchin and Sinema, but let's be real, not a single Republican has been willing to step up for any of these things. And so he really has the deck stacked against him. And then, you have Afghanistan happen. Well, I don't even know what they really could have done differently. And now you have this situation in Ukraine. So I think he's had a lot against him, and I'll give him credit. They've been able to actually get quite a bit done. I'm sure they're about to appoint, someone amazing to the Supreme Court. I hope it's Leandra Kruger, but he has multiple excellent choices. But it's tough with this environment. Now, in terms of our party, I do think that there are people within our own party who did not want Biden to succeed and have been taking every opportunity to take pot shots at him, which is unfortunate. But we're a diverse party, and that's just how we are. I also think that coming out of the pandemic, like I said before, the release of anxiety and just tension, it is sort of a weird time for people's psyche, and people are just sort of upset now in a lot of ways.
Do other people, does that ring true with people? Are people just kind of, do you have a background latent just feeling of just being upset? Raise your hand if you do. Don't be shy. Okay. Some people feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've always had crime in this city. I've lived here for 25 years. We've always had challenges in terms of homelessness and drug use on our streets, but the anger level about it now is higher than I remember.
And do you think what do you think that's about?
Well, I mean, people are, and to be clear, if your garage is getting broken into, and if your kid sees someone shooting up on the street, and if you have a drug dealer on your, or 10 drug dealers on your corner, you should be upset. And I don't blame people for being upset about that. But the intensity is higher than what I've seen in the past. And so I'm not criticizing that. It's reality, and we as policymakers have to respond to that, but respond to it in a responsible way, because there are times when people are like, you need to do something about this, and the things that they want aren't necessarily going to solve what it is that they want to be solved. And so it puts policymakers in a tough spot. I do not envy the mayor right now. She has a really, really hard job, and I think she's doing some terrific work. Obviously the district attorney is in a challenging situation right now.
So it sounds like from listening to you, you actually aren't of the opinion that like there's something fundamentally wrong with the party, or it is kind of topsy-turvy, but it is a tough time to be a Democrat. And also, I guess what I'm seeing in the subtext of the last part of your comments is being a politician right now is a lot different than it was when you started out in politics with Nextdoor and social media and apps and stuff for people to kind of comment and express themselves. So am I getting that right?
I think it's always been hard, but yes, social media makes everything more intense. And I know I get targeted a lot on social media by the right wing, by the QAnon people, the anti-vaxxers, and it does create a different vibe than you used to have. But I was just going to say something, and I cannot remember what I was about to say.
Was it about the topsy-turviness?
No, it was.
I've said topsy-turvy like 4 times.
Oh no, this is what it's about. So there's a narrative, and this is a challenge in our party right now. There's a narrative that the Democratic Party is, and I'm going to use the word just because it is too woke, and they use that word, and they've turned that into everything is woke. This is woke as a criticism, and that the Democrats are somehow disconnected. I mean, the Democrats, without a single Republican vote, delivered that massive aid package, extending unemployment, et cetera, in early 2021. That wasn't like, I mean, that was woke. That was woke because it was woke to like what people needed at the time, and not a single Republican voted for it. The Democrats delivered, the infrastructure bill, and yes, there were Republicans that voted for it, but let's be clear, 2/3 of the Republicans in Congress, 2/3 of the Republican senators, and probably 80 or 90% of the Republicans in the House did not vote for the infrastructure package to fund water systems and broadband and public transportation and roads. So those are 2 massive achievements that every single Democrat in Congress, or maybe a few, almost every Democrat voted for, and very few Republicans voted for. But so the Democrats are very much in touch with what people want. And yet the Republicans have spun this narrative that we're out of touch and we're quote unquote woke. So for example, every time I try to do anything about like supporting trans kids, we know that trans kids are under incredible attack throughout this. It's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, to try to demonize and attack children to score political points, whether you can't play sports, you can't go to the bathroom, you can't get health care. Now this just a horrific thing that the governor of Texas did yesterday, that if you have a trans kid, we're going to take the kid and put him in foster care and then criminally prosecute you. You wonder why so many, queer youth consider suicide. Imagine that you're a 12-year-old trans kid, and your parents are supportive of you and have you in a loving, nurturing environment, and you get this signal that because of who you are, you're going to be taken away from your family and your parents are going to go to jail. Imagine for a kid hearing that from political leaders. And so we do a lot of work to try to support, the trans kids and the rest of the LGBTQ community. And I get called, even by some Democrats, oh, you're just being woke, that you're focusing on that. People care about schools and crime and this and that. And I'm like, of course, yeah, we care about crime in schools, of course, but we also care about our kids. But it's gotten into this like narrative that even Democrats are latching onto, and that concerns me. It becomes this, let's dismiss progressive policy work as quote unquote woke and disconnected. That's concerning.
So you are our state senator. Last time I checked. For
Yes.
now.
For now.
For now.
Until they boot me out.
Until they move you out. And so you represent San Francisco and parts of the southern part, post South San Francisco and
Daly City, Broadmoor,
Coma, to in the state Senate. And I guess one question I had on the outset is, the legislative session ended February 18th, correct? All the bills had to get put in.
No, it was yes, the bill introduction.
All the bills
was last Friday. Yes.
Last Friday. How do you figure out, of all the many problems that affect both your district and constituents, and as a state legislator, you're thinking about what problems affect Californians. How do you choose, or how have you chosen, maybe in this legislative session, what pieces of law you are going to introduce, what bills you're going to introduce? How do you prioritize what you're fighting for?
Well, I try to be, my view is when you're in elected office, particularly in the era of term limits, you have a shelf life. And at some point, if my constituents choose to return me again, I can do up to 12 years in the Senate, and then I'm done. And so because we all have a shelf life, you have to, I think, pick I can't fix everything. I mean, maybe if I had like 200 years to serve in office, I would be able to fix everything. But
so that's how long it'll take.
Well, we'll see. So you can't focus on everything, and I have there are issues that I care about, but I have colleagues who are doing great work, and so I don't need to be the one leading on them. So I early on carved out a few spaces that I really focus on. Housing, first and foremost, mental health and addiction treatment, criminal justice and sentencing reform, LGBTQ, civil rights, solar energy, and those are like the big ones. And so every year I always do a few bills in each of those areas and try to make a little more progress every year. Also, sustainable transportation, transit, biking, et cetera. And then, so I always have a few bills in each of those areas, and that's the bulk of what I do. And then you always have the random, bill that you just decide to work on that year.
Okay, so you've been a state senator for how long?
I'm in my 6th year.
6th year. So if you look back on the 6 years, you look about that grab bag of stuff that you just talked about, the things that are important to you, do you feel satisfied with what you've been able to accomplish? On the scale from completely satisfied as a 1, completely dissatisfied as a 10, where would you put this sister right here?
I will never be completely satisfied.
Okay, so we're not a 1.
But I'm close to it.
Okay. Tell me about that.
No, I feel good about the work that we've been able to do. I mean, I'm a big believer. I think one of the biggest mistakes, the two biggest mistakes that elected officials make are, one, not realizing how much power they actually have, that we actually have to, even though we're not dictators, right? I can't pass a law on my own. That whether you're a city council member or a state senator, whatever, the actual power that you have to move the needle on something. And number 2, negotiating against ourselves. And so there are times when it's so tempting to be like, okay, I'm going to introduce this bill. This is too much. This is too bold. I'm gonna chop it back down, as opposed to introducing what you want and then going through the process. And if you're forced to compromise, that's politics, that's life, so be it. But don't start out pre-diluting what you're going to do. And sometimes I get criticized for that because I don't like pre-diluting what we're trying to do. And we introduce big things, and then you pass as much of it as you can. But when you negotiate against yourself at the beginning, then by the time you get to the end of the process and everyone has their whack at what you're doing, you can end up with something really small. So I came in on housing and decided, and when I was running for the Senate, I had supporters in the YIMBY movement who were like, no, we don't want you to go. You have to be at the Board of Supervisors. You can't do anything about housing in the Senate. I'm like, you're wrong. And I'm going to prove you wrong. And so we got there, and I said, you know what? This way we do housing in California is so ass backwards. Please excuse my language, which is so.
I know. I kind of like that phrase.
Yes, ass
personally.
backwards. It's a good one. Yes.
So you can use that anytime you want.
Okay. That we were. I'll try to find.
I'm not
I'll find
exactly
another.
sure
I'll try
where
to
it
find another way to
comes
use
from, like what that means, but I'm okay with it.
Yes.
For some
Urban
reason.
Dictionary can tell us.
Okay, I'll check it after. I'll check it after this.
But that it's people's views and parking and the egos of cities like that are more important than whether people have a place to live, right? And like that the view is more important, or whether your neighbor has a full backyard as opposed to a half backyard is more important than whether your kid has had 3 teachers in a year because 2 of them have moved out of state because they couldn't figure out how to have a place that they could afford, or you have a neighbor who's now living in their car and going to work every day and sleeping in the car at night, or you have your best friend just moved to Idaho because they just couldn't imagine a future here, and that somehow all these other things around parking and views and whether neighbors get to have a say in what gets built in their neighborhood, that all of these things are more important than whether people have a place to live. And so we started out every year I do a few bills to try to keep pushing a little further. Sometimes I take a swing for the rafters. Sometimes I try to hit a double. And I think we've been able to make, not just me, but a group of us make some progress in the last few years, or on, some of the really gnarly criminal justice issues facing the LGBTQ community, because our community is still criminalized. We get shoved onto the sex offender registry, particularly gay men, including youth, to have people's lives destroyed. We continue to criminalize people living with HIV. We criminalize trans sex workers. And so we've tried to methodically dismantle all of that. And so we got the HIV criminal laws repealed. We basically ratcheted back the sex offender registry to stop shoving 19-year-olds on there because they, God forbid, were dating a 17-year-old. And we doing this work, which is really not always popular. But when you represent a place like San Francisco, you have a space to do that work, and you have to. And so we've been just trying to build every year in some of these areas. And I think we've had a lot of success, but there's a lot more work to do.
I want to get into housing. Thank you for that, Scott. I want to get into housing in particular. Obviously, it's a topic we all care about. Before I do that, you're a state senator with a national profile, which is uncommon. And I think it's because you have swung for the rafters many times, and it's gotten you some hot water. It's also allowed you and your work to rise above kind of the conversation. I guess I wanted to ask what you think it is about you that allows you to not negotiate against yourself, right? Because even in my own small way, right, I'm on the SFMTA board, and I think about stuff I want to do. It's like, well, I could never ask to do that. That just seems out of, we don't have the money for that, or that just seems impossible, or there's too much, people who would be against it. It just seems there is a lot of pressure to just figure out what is the minimum viable product, to use a techie word, for this thing, and then try to get that in. You seem to say, we should do this big thing, and then you try to make a law about it and see what happens. So what is it about you that you think causes you to do that?
I think, well, there are two things. It's not just about me, but it's about San Francisco. So first of all, when I was elected in November of 2016, a few weeks after I won, I sat down with my predecessor, Mark Leno, in his office to get his advice, how to be a successful senator. I didn't know if I was going to be a successful senator. I had never set foot in the state, literally had never set foot in the state capitol before I started running for the Senate. Had never been there before. I was operating on a board of an 11-member board of supervisors, where I had to convince 5 other supervisors to agree with me. In committee, I had to, if I was on it, I would have to convince 2 people on a committee. Now you go to this institution that's 120 members. You know, you have to get 21 senators, 41 assembly members. Sometimes you have to get 27 senators, 54 assembly members. You might have a committee. You might have to go through like 6 committees, sometimes 8 committees, if your bill gets referred to that many committees, which sometimes it does. So it's so complex. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, you know, succeed here. And I sat down with, you know, with Senator Leno, and we had a good conversation. He gave me a lot of tips. And one of the things he said, Scott, just always remember that the beauty of representing San Francisco is your constituents will give you the space to push the envelope. In fact, your constituents demand that you push the envelope. And so because of the beauty that is San Francisco and the beauty that is the people of San Francisco, I can really push on these things. And people, even if I have people regularly who come up to me on the street and say, you know what, I don't agree with everything that you do. And this one thing in particular, I really disagreed with, but I know that you believe in what you're doing. And so I always vote for you. And it's a very San Francisco thing. People respect strong advocacy, whether it's from an elected official or from an activist in the community, and people want you to push. And then it's also a personality thing. I don't want to say that I don't care what people think about me. I mean, I'm a human being. I have emotions and feelings like everyone else, but I have long ago stopped letting it get under my skin. And in politics, if you want everyone to love you, even assuming that would ever be possible, which it isn't, but if you go in there saying I want everyone to love me, you're going to fail. You're never going to get anything done. You have to be at peace. You have to be at peace with people hating you now. I mean, I'm doing a bill now to lower the vaccine age of consent from 18 to 12, so that teenagers can go in and get the COVID shot or the measles shot or their flu shot, even if their parent are anti-vaxxers, or even if their parents just aren't making the time and don't have time to take them, they should be able to go in, which a number of other states do, and we should be doing that here. I mean, California, you can go in at 12 years old and get an abortion without telling your parents, but you can't get the flu shot. Your parent has to be with you. So we're doing that. There's now literally on Signal, we discovered that's like the absolute like toxic breeding ground for the anti-vaxxer movement. There's a whole.
It's also where everyone in San Francisco gets their mushrooms.
Yes. Okay. Well, there two things can be true.
Just in case you didn't know.
So there is a Wiener page on there, and so we got.
And it is not what you think, everyone. Yeah. That's the other thing people use Signal for, and that is different.
Exactly. We I don't know about that part of Signal, but I'll figure that out. But we get death threats there. We get the QAnon death threats and the NIMBYs around the state, who I am like the pariah for the NIMBY world. I have colleagues who will say that they'll be at a community meeting where someone will be up and be like, you need to vote against every single Scott Wiener bill. And they'll be like, wait, do you know that he does this, this, and this other than housing? And I'll be like, no, I didn't know that. But they just have this hatred. And I'm just at peace with it. It's okay. That's just how politics is. There are going to be people who really hate you, but they don't hate you because you were mean to them. They hate you because of the position you took on housing or whatever else. And you just have to be at peace with that. If you're not, you're not going to do well.
Okay, so where is the housing fight right now? 6 years in, I know you introduced a bill yesterday. Spoke about introducing a bill that allows public universities to build housing for students without getting an environmental review. What is left to be done? I'm sure there's a lot, but give us for the folks listening or where is the movement right now?
I think the big things we've been able to do, and it really started before I got there, and we've been able to accelerate it, is number one, first and foremost, we've had good housing laws in California going back to the late 60s. From like the late 60s to the early 80s, California passed a series of really solid housing bills, forcing, I won't go into what they are, but good ones. and they either had no teeth or cities just brazenly ignored them, including San Francisco, which is one of the worst cities in terms of ignoring state housing law for many, many years. And over the last 6-7 years, we put significant teeth into those bills. And we've also increased enforcement by giving more power to the Attorney General. And so our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, is a true housing champion and is no nonsense about this kind of stuff. And also bolstering our housing agency, the Housing and Community Development Department, and giving them more authority, and then having, you know, a whole enforcement unit. And so that's one thing we've done. So when we pass a housing law, we mean it. And so San Francisco, you can't do things like, you know, reject 500 units of housing, 20% affordable on a valet parking lot a block from BART. You can't do that. Or Woodside, no, like we love mountain lions, but just because a mountain lion is walking through your city, as the Mountain Lion Foundation pointed out, you know, doesn't mean you are like you don't have to build housing. Or the city of Cupertino. The city of Cupertino, I've said this before, I'll say it again. The city of Cupertino is the worst housing actor in the entire state of California. Please let people know that.
Why?
It's just atrocious. And so we've really beefed up. What we've also done is we passed a series of laws to say, you know what, instead of having this nebulous approval process where we make up the rules as we go and say, yeah, we knew we zoned that for 40 feet, but we're only going to allow you to have a 30-foot height limit. We know we zoned that for 20 units. We're only going to allow you to have 8. We know we never wrote this down anywhere, but we're coming up with some new design standards as we go, and so on and so forth, that we're moving towards a more objective era where we say, you need to set the rules ahead of time. And then if someone comes forward and checks all the boxes for those rules, they get their permit now. Not in a year, not in 2 years, not after 10 hearings. They get it right now. And so we've done that, and it's called streamlining ministerial approval. We've done that in a series of laws that have allowed more and more housing to get approved quickly. Like in San Francisco, a law that I passed, SB 35, has led to over, thank you, thousands of affordable units being approved like in a matter of months. And San Francisco has embraced that. Some other cities have bought it. We've also tackled zoning, which is really hard. That 70% of California is zoned only for single-family homes, which was invented. Meaning, to be honest, it was invented by the city of Berkeley over 100 years ago to keep Black people and poor people out of Berkeley, and then it spread like wildfire around the country. It's like, oh, that's a new tool where we can keep the people we don't want out of our towns. And so we've been trying to dismantle that, not to get rid of single family homes, but to say you can have single family homes and small multi-unit in the same neighborhood and the sky doesn't fall. So we made some progress there, but there's a lot more work to do there. And then finally, we have been forcing cities to plan for the actual amount of housing that we need. We set housing goals for cities every 8 years. And historically in California, those goals were like, Beverly Hills got an allocation of 3 units of housing for an 8-year period. And then they bragged about how they met their goals, 3 units. So we fixed that. And now that's causing all sorts of tumult in Southern California. It's going to come to the Bay Area where cities that were getting an allocation of like 100 units over an 8-year period are now getting an allocation of 3,000 units over and there's tumult.
And
so
you said there's teeth. You said they're going to have to do this, or what? Or there's like they get sued, or like what? What is the actual mechanism that's going to force these towns to build this housing?
Well, the law that I mentioned, SB 35, provides that if you don't meet your housing goals, right? If you don't meet your housing goals, you become streamlined, which means you lose all discretion. You have 90 days to issue the permit. And so you can't go through any of those appeals or discretionary process. We also, we empowered nonprofits also to file lawsuits. So there are some amazing nonprofits. One is called Carla, one is called Yimby Law, and they go around and they sue cities. They call it the Sue the Cities Project. They sue cities, and so you have, city council arbitrarily rejects a project, and boom, they get sued. and they lose. And so it's not only on the state and on the attorney general to monitor everything. We have private actors who are doing that as well. And there's also I think some of the embarrassment. Like I think it was very embarrassing for Woodside how much publicity the mountain lion situation got. And so there's a lot more just people paying attention.
Got it. All right. I want to get to audience questions. Someone ask a couple kind of rapid fire-ish, though I'm sure none of them will actually be very short, but I'm going to try. How do you think the governor's doing post-recall? Is he juiced?
I think he is. And I think he juice. I don't know. I'm not sure what that means, but
I don't either. I mean, like, is he got like pep in his step?
Yeah, yes, he has pep in his step. There, it's interesting. People
just imagine him like hands through the hair, like scepter in hand.
If you
laying down the law,
vetoing my bill, doing all that, yeah, he has plenty of pep in his stuff. I think when you, as an elected official, if you beat a recall, especially when you beat it soundly, you come out dramatically stronger. It's in a way that, like a bogus recall, like happening against the governor, is sometimes the best thing that can happen to you. So I think he came out strong, and he's, I think he's, I sense a lot of energy from the governor.
Do you, on the subject of recalls, how do you think the recall of the three school board members affects San Francisco politics? And do you think Chesa Boudin is going to get recalled in April? Is it
June?
June. Gosh, so
well,
many.
I think with the school board, and I supported the school board recall. It's the only recall I've ever supported, but I just thought it was absolutely necessary, and for a lot of reasons that I think people probably know. And I think that recall is completely energizing San Francisco politics. First of all, there's a whole new just world of activists, of parents, particularly in the Chinese community, but I think more broadly than that. And just a new generation of activists who have not been on the scene before, who sort of came on the scene because of this, and they did something powerful. And I think also, the Board of Education, we've really struggled with. There have been, and I want to be clear, I'm not just like blanket, being negative about school board members. We have some good people on the Board of Education, and we've always had some good people, but we haven't always had a good majority on the school board. And it's been frustrating for a lot of people. And the stuff that we saw play out during the pandemic, there was a much more of a microscope on the school district then, and so people saw it. But a lot of things have been playing out for a long time, and but the broader population hadn't really been focused or paying attention. And so so I think we're going to see much more of a focus on the school district and leadership of the school district, which is a good thing. And I think people saw that, what, participation in politics does matter, like can actually make change. And I think it was just a shockwave, a very positive shockwave. In terms of the DA recall, and I'm not involved in that. I have not taken a position on it. I don't think I will. And I think the DA recall, to me, is in a very different category than the Board of Education recall. I think he has a shot of beating it. I don't know what's going to happen. I think there is a lot of frustration around crime. I think there are, I supported a different candidate in 2019. I supported Susie Loftus, but I've developed a working relationship with Chesa. And, I think it's a little bit, sometimes when you're mayor, there are things that you have very little control over that, ultimately hung on you. And I think that's happening now to an extent with the district attorney. But I don't know what's going to happen in June.
AD 17, who's your man?
I am neutral in that race. One of them is going to be my colleague, and we're going to have it's just us. Yeah, it's just us. What I've learned is little San Francisco, there are 3 of us in the legislature. LA County has 30. So the three of us have to be hyper unified. And when David Hsu, Phil Ting, and I were always hyper unified. And I think that was to the benefit of the city, and that needs to happen with whoever wins. I've been I have a good relationship with both of them. I sit down with them. Very open door for both of them, and one of them will be my colleague, and I will, support and help whichever one of them ends up being my colleague.
Are you going to run for Nancy's seat?
We have an amazing member of Congress,
but she's not going to be our member of Congress forever.
Well, she just
she won't live forever.
She sort of just played a key role saving our democracy and saving the Affordable Care Act. And I don't even want to imagine what it's like without Nancy Pelosi there, as she sits doing her. She's
always with us.
Her Donald Trump clap back there. I think she, and I say this with all sincerity, that I know there's when people are of a certain age, it shouldn't be an elected office anymore. And there are certainly people who at some point, we all have to know when it's time to step aside. But let's be clear, Nancy Pelosi does not fit in that category. When you look at how she is now, she's going to be 82 this year, 82. And she is sharp as tack. She looks great. She moves around great. And she is just rocking it there. And I am really glad that she's there to help the president be successful. And to me, as long as she is in that role, it's to San Francisco's benefit. It's to the country's benefit. Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah, I'll let you go just after saying this, which is that, it's good that the state Senate has long terms, but it is a bit of a strange profession. You mentioned it already, right? These are large, not intractable, but complex, very difficult problems to try to solve. They require, chipping away at a large boulder for some of them. And yet you are, as a politician, required to sing for your supper almost, or ask the million voters of San Francisco to allow you to keep your job. And so you have to be thinking about what you will do next to continue to do the work.
Yeah, but I also being in the Senate, there's 40 of us. And, I'm in the leadership. I chair, 2 committees, including one that is my core passion. And every year I look at our bill package and I'm excited about the bills that we're doing. So I'm in no rush to leave the Senate. And so there was a moment in 2018 or after the 2018 election when there was some tumult in the House Democratic conference, and there was a push there was a question for a minute, will Nancy be able to hold on? I always knew she was going to be able to hold on because she's Nancy Pelosi, and she's sort of just an extreme force of nature. But people were like, oh, are you going to run for Congress? I'm like, I just got here. She needs to keep going as leader, and thank God that she stayed on. Because if you imagine during the Trump years, if we hadn't had Nancy Pelosi, I can't even, that nightmare would have been ratcheted up 40 degrees. So
I guess it's better than people not asking you if you're going to run for office, because then they're they don't want you. They're be done. Okay, let's go to audience questions. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Wiener. Thank you so much for this conversation. I had a question related to housing specifically. Where do you see the leadership of the Assembly and Senate when it comes to housing this year, whether it's bills being introduced or the budget? And then what bill are you most excited about related to housing that's not your own?
So on the latter, they haven't all been announced yet, because some of them are still what we call spot bills or placeholder bills. So there are a couple I'm really excited about, but I can't say what they are yet because that would be breaching confidences. But there are some good ones.
Scott. Wow.
Yeah.
Are you talking about it on Signal?
Maybe. I'm trying to think if there's one I'm forgetting about that I can talk about. Well, I think actually one that I'm excited about, as mentioned, I introduced a student housing bill on Tuesday to try to expedite the creation of student housing and faculty housing. Kevin McCarty, an assembly member from Sacramento, has a bill to pretty significantly increase available funding for student housing. And that's the other piece of the puzzle. We need to make it faster, but we have to actually fund it. And so when you look at the rates of student homelessness, it's really depressing. And so that's one that I am excited about. There are a couple others coming that I think are going to be really good. And I'm sorry, the first part of what you...
The first part of the question was the new leadership of the House and Senate. How are they going to be on
they're
housing?
Not new. It's the same. So both the pro tem Senator Atkins and the Speaker, Mr. Rendon, are both very strong on housing, and so I think that'll continue. There is a tension now that's impacting some of our housing work in terms of a fight between the building trades and the affordable housing nonprofits, and it's I got caught in the middle of that in 2020, and it was really it was not pleasant. And a number of us have tried to achieve a resolution there, and it has not happened yet. The Speaker got involved in that last year and tried to force a compromise, and it just sort of didn't work. I give him a lot of credit for trying. And so I think we have good leadership in place. I'm really was very nervous when David Jew, was happy for him and for the city that he's city attorney. He's going to be fantastic. But losing him as chair of the Assembly Housing Committee made a lot of us nervous. But now that Buffy Wicks is the chair, she's amazing, and she and I are like, hand in glove. So I think we have good leadership for the year on housing.
Great. All right.
Hi.
My question is about transit. So
I'm shocked.
We have a situation, as you know, Unibart ridership is down everywhere. Yeah. Is there any effort bubbling up at the state level to try to subsidize operating expenses over the next few years while we're hoping for downtowns to come back? And then the second thing is the high-speed rail bonds. Do you think as part of the budget, they're going to be able to sell those bonds this year?
Did everyone hear the question? Yes,
Yeah.
Love this question.
So in terms of transit funding, there's a group of us who try every year to get more money into transit. We had some success last year because the budget was so good. Hopefully that'll happen again. Transit, unfortunately, does not have the deepest support in the legislature because most members have districts that are not particularly transit rich. Of course, they have people, typically poor people in their district who are very bus reliant. But the politics of transit are different, say in San Francisco or the East Bay than they are in a lot of other areas. So we'll work again this year to try to get money into transit, and we always work with the California Transit Association on that. And then in terms of because I think ridership will get back up again, but it's just going to take time. And so the last thing we need is to allow these systems to fall apart. And then it becomes a death spiral. Then ridership will never return because service is down. So we need. I will give Congress a lot of credit for the tranches of money and during the pandemic that have allowed these systems to survive. And we're lucky that the two leaders happen to be a person from New York City and a person from San Francisco. That helps a lot. But we have to keep going. In terms of high-speed rail, I suspect we'll be able to do it. The governor, I know, is very committed to, and this is selling the final high-speed rail bonds. I have some colleagues from LA who are wanting to divert some of that money to local transit projects. They're all great projects. I support that, but they should go to the general fund for that and not take the money from high-speed rail. And so the governor is very committed to protecting those high-speed rail funds, and a number of us are supporting him in that. I suspect we'll get there, but it might not be 100%. So there might have to be some sort of compromise.
All right, go ahead.
Thanks, Senator. I applaud the work on housing. I want to ask about the issue that's really kind of jumped to the forefront here, and I think in all the states, major cities, which is the intersection of homelessness, mental health, drug addiction. housing costs has got to be a factor, but can we really kind of build our way out of that conundrum? Or what else has to happen? And just how frustrating is the situation with the conservatorship?
Yeah, so I've as I mentioned at the beginning, one of my priorities every year is mental health and addiction treatment, and I get attacked sometimes from the left and from more middle of the road folks on that. So we worked for several years to try to expand the ability of San Francisco and a few other places to conserve people who are dying on our streets, people who are literally, people you see, lying in their excrement, or screaming at cars in the middle of the street. People who are just not capable of caring for themselves, and our conservatorship laws are very, very outdated. We closed down the state hospitals, which was a good thing because a lot of people were getting warehoused who could be very much in the community, but we didn't replace it with anything. And we ended up with a very, very bad situation. So for probably about 1% of homeless people would be eligible for this conservatorship. We got a lot of opposition to it, finally got it passed. San Francisco has been extremely slow in implementing it. And they've just started to conserve a few people now, but they need to really ramp it up. And it's really about people not dying on our streets. Where housing comes in, there are people who have mental health issues who don't need to be conserved, but if they're out on the streets, their mental health issues are going to get worse. And if you can stabilize them in housing or transitional housing, you can actually start getting them more effectively into treatment. Treatment is very hard when someone's living on the street. It's a lot easier when someone's stabilized in housing. And in terms of, drug use and addiction, and I've been getting, there's being up in some quarters a lot these days because I'm a proponent for, and I have legislation to authorize San Francisco, Oakland, and LA to open up safe consumption sites so that people can, instead of shooting up or using on the streets in front of people's homes and businesses, and where kids and families are walking around, they can actually go inside in a safe, controlled setting where they're not in front of the entire community, and where if they have an overdose, it can be reversed. And we're losing about 700 or 800 people a year to overdose deaths in San Francisco. That's a disaster. And each of those people was a human being with parents and siblings and friends and loved ones. And for decades, safe consumption sites have been open in Europe and Canada and Australia, and there's never been a recorded overdose death ever over 30 years in any of these sites. New York City just opened one up, and they've reversed a number of overdoses. Not a single person has died. And so, it's just as a basic matter of harm reduction, we need to have these spaces. It's not a silver bullet. We have to have treatment available for people. These sites need to be a way for people to be able to access services and go into treatment. But the war on drugs approach has never worked. I don't like it that drug dealers are out in the Tenderloin. And I'm not saying that there needs to be accountability for that, but we also have to be clear that as long as there's demand, you can arrest drug dealers. There's going to be new drug dealers out there. And so we have to fundamentally address sort of the demand side. And we do that by finding ways to help people into treatment. I will say that fentanyl and carfentanil and all the other synthetic opioids have changed everything. I don't think it changes the fundamental approach, but there are now markets in this country, not San Francisco, but there are places in this country where you can't get heroin anymore. Heroin is no longer available on the drug market. It's all synthetic, and ones that are worse than fentanyl, more deadly than fentanyl. And so, we need to give people more capacity to test their drugs so that they know that there's fentanyl, and we have to aggressively offer treatment to people.
Okay, it is 8:15, so let's get one or two more questions. Rachel?
Thank you for your work.
Teamwork here. So I really appreciate all the housing questions you have. I also work for a city in the South Bay, so I get to see it both on the side and the side. One of the things I want to hear about is pushback that comes from legislation. Having to be sure to put a ballot initiative kind of pull back. Essentially, I would say the last 10 years of progress of housing legislation.
For 50 years.
50 years. And so I just wonder, one, if you know that really has goals, like are you concerned about it? And if it does, like what does it mean to think about your future strategy? Or you think, like has a strategy get possibly in a ballot, but you feel that voters would reject, such an initiative, or how are you thinking about that? Like, it gives me a little bit of concern. I don't know how worried I should be about it.
Yeah, so I bear partial, it was inevitable, but I bear partial responsibility. It was my some of my bills that sort of summons all of the NIMBYs around the state to connect them together. They found each other.
That is not a convention I would want to go to.
Yes. Well, actually, okay, it's a group called Livable California. You can Google them. And
and just sorry for the Zoom, real quick. The question was, are you worried about some
about backlash? And I'll
backlash
get to that in a
legislation?
second. A group called Livable California. They are the statewide NIMBY group. They have like these monthly calls or Zooms, and some of the YIMBYs participate every month and live tweet it. And if all you have to do is verbatim, like live tweet what they're saying, and you don't even need to comment or say anything else. It's really it's extraordinary. So these folks they want to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. We might call it the pro-segregation constitutional amendment to basically kick the state out of housing policy and basically repeal all state housing laws, like fair housing requirements, or requirements that you're not allowed to like zone for segregation in your community, or requirements around affordable housing. I mean, just or requirements that you have to plan for growth. It would just wipe it all away. It would also have devastating impacts in terms of our climate efforts, because a lot of our housing work intersects with, trying to not promote sprawl, trying to protect open space, trying to focus growth, all be wiped away. So it's a really toxic, horrible proposal that would be very damaging. They apparently, I'm told they collected about 100,000 signatures. They probably have to collect about 1.3 million or something in order to have enough to actually get it on the ballot. They never got quite enough money. And I think as long as they don't get some major funding, it's probably not going to make it. They've now deferred it to 2024 because there was no way they were going to get the signatures. But all it takes is someone come in and write a significant check, a few $1,000,000. I think it might take 5 to 10 million to qualify it. Actually, it's gotten very expensive to collect signatures with paid signature gatherers, and it would make the ballot. I think if it makes the ballot, I think we can beat it, and I think we will beat it. The coalition behind it will be very, very diverse, ranging from, pretty far, highly hyper lefty housing activist world, to the builder world and in the YIMBY world and everything. So I think we would beat it, but it would be a huge distraction.
I know there's more questions, but given the hour, I want to respect people's time and close this out, and just close it by saying thank you to you, Scott Wiener. Let's give him a round of applause. Whether you agree with every single thing he said tonight, or you don't agree with anything he said tonight, he is a public servant, right? And he wakes up every day and thinks not just about what he can do to help us, his constituents, but also people who will never know him all over the state. It requires a level of hard work and courage and putting yourself out there, right? Scott has shown me the messages that he gets online. and it's just wrong. And so to put yourself out there for something that you care about, to help people who will never know you, it demands some respect. And so I have a lot of respect for you, my friend, and it's amazing to see all the things that you do. Final word goes to you.
No, I just want to say what's happening in Ukraine now is it's not just scary because of the implications of war in Europe. Vladimir Putin is a complete sociopath. He is a absolute fascist, brutal dictator. And what's happening in Russia in terms of LGBTQ people, in terms of any kind of dissent, is horrible. And the fact that he's now trying to conquer other countries is absolutely terrifying. And I know there's a tendency to be like, that's over there, we shouldn't be focused on that. It is our problem. And if he continues with what's happening in Ukraine now, there's going to be a humanitarian disaster in Ukraine, and there's going to be a lot of refugees, and we have to be, I think, willing and able to, take on refugees in this country. And one of the downsides of our terrible housing policy is that it becomes harder and harder.
How are you going to bring Ukraine back to housing?
Because like when we want people to be able to come here, whether they're fleeing from Afghanistan or Ukraine, or queer people from Iran or Uganda, and they come here and there's like nowhere for them to live. So we want a community that's welcoming and affordable and can absorb everyone from everywhere, because that's what we're about in San Francisco.
If you don't already follow Senator Scott Wiener, please do. He's very active on all the socials. You can take a photograph of us and post it. You can tag me, Manny's at Welcome to Manny's, and Scott at Scott Wiener. If you're not already a sponsor of Manny's, it's how we have survived this pandemic and how we will continue to survive and thrive and do all the work we need to do to kick some fucking ass after this whole thing's finally over, and win in the midterms in 2022. You can become a sponsor at welcometomannys.com. You just took a picture, didn't you? There you go. Both of that's my guy right there. Not actually, but maybe. Welcometomannys.com. You can become a sponsor. I'm just trying to get it all. I'm trying to get sponsorships here. I'm trying to get a boyfriend. Thank you very much for coming tonight. You can exit on the door on the right-hand side. We have a lot more programs coming up. Have a good night, everyone.